welcome to this video. We're going to have a quick look at Photoshop basics and specifically look at creating our own advertising quality storing boards in Photoshop using photo references. Now, ordinarily you may want to do your own photo shoots for stuff like this and sort of do a photo mash together. But in this case, I'm going to be using some references from a film. So this one's from The Big Lebowski here, and there's my image here. Now, what you do want to look at typically when looking for images on the internet is the image size. And if we have a look at this one here, it's 1100 by 619 pixels. So when you are doing your search, you can go to Tools, go to Size, and you can choose your size variances here. Now that is usually important if we're doing a photo mashup or something that's going to require high res. In this case, we're going to be drawing over the top of our image, so it's going to be less important, but it's still good to have a decent quality. Now, one of the things we're going to do in this situation is we're going to start up a new document in Photoshop. Just remember, I'm going to go to Window, Workspace, Reset Essentials. Typically our workspace will start off in Essentials like this, and there's stuff in here, over here on the panels that we just basically don't need right now, and they are limiting our workspace. So let's maximize that. This Learn panel, for example, I can tear that off, and then I can hit the X and close that down, or I can go to Window and untick things that I don't want. So libraries I don't need, properties I probably don't need right now either. Color picker I'm okay with, and the layers panel is a definite, so definitely need that. Of course, our move tool V, very important. Now let's create a new document. So I'm going to go File, New, and remember our shortcuts are usually showed in our drop down. So if you can start remember this, in my case Command N for a new document, or Control N in Windows. So let's create a new document. Very quickly with this, we do have different formats from film and TV to print, web, everything in between. I'm going to use print, and I'm going to use A4, and I'm going to set it to landscape. Now, the main thing with print is the resolution is a bit higher, with 300 pixels per inch. If we go to film and video, it is only 72 pixels per inch, so a lot more detail in print. Obviously we don't need that resolution if we are working directly in film. It's going to chew up a lot of data, but for print this is what we want. And create, and there is our page. Now remember, I'm going to bring over my layers panel here. We start off with a background layer. We do not want to draw or paint into the background layer. It's just a white canvas in the background. We want to create in empty layers. We can create empty layers by pushing this little icon down the bottom right of the layers panel. It's the create new layer panel, and it will create an empty layer above. You can also go to layer, new layer, or shift command or shift control N. You can rename this by double clicking on the name here, and I'm going to call this line work for now, or just line. You can also right click and give it a color identifier. So as we get more complex, that's going to be more inducive. Now what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to show you a few of the drawing tools, but I'm going to bring in my image to start with. So I'm over here in Safari, and let's have a quick squiz of what we're going to put in here. I'm going to try keep something reasonably simple. This one here, I do like this image here, so let's try that. It's only 600 by 337, so not high res. Right click, copy image, and you can save it onto your desktop and drag it in, and I'm going to Control V and paste. Now if you do drag this in directly from the desktop, it may come in as a smart object, have a little cross through it. You'll need to apply that, and I'll get a little bit into smart objects later on. Now as you can see, it is a very small image in comparison to the size of our A4 page, and there it is there. It is actually in that layer there, and I'm going to transform this. To transform, you can either go to Edit, Free Transform, or simply hit Command T or Control T on APC. So you can see there's the shortcut there. Bring up the command there, and this will allow me to start scaling this. Now we want to make sure it is scaled proportionally. This is super important. We don't want a stretched image. It's going to look weird. Even if it's slightly out of there, it's going to look strange. But so hold down Shift as you transform, and it will constrain the proportions. And you can also do it up here, the width, height, and we can hit this little link, and that will help us constrain the proportions as well. But Shift is the go-to for this sort of thing. I'm going to fit it to screen a little bit better. Once that's done, you need to apply it by hitting the tick key. If you don't like what you've done, you hit the circle with a line through, and that will cancel it. So Command T, hold down Shift, drag it out. I'm going to move it down a little bit as well. Now you can nudge this using the arrow keys. You can nudge it up and down, but I'm going to apply, either hit the tick or hit enter, and there it is. Still not high res. If we zoom in, we're going to start seeing all those little pixels, and it's getting a bit blurry, but we're going to do a paint over for this and start figuring this out. So one of the things we do not want to do is draw on our image here. So I'm going to create a new layer above that, and let's call this draw layer. Up to you what you want, whatever your naming conventions that work, but typically you want to have something that other people are going to recognize. The line layer, I'm actually going to lower the opacity of, and in layers panel you can see there's an option here that says opacity. There is fill as well. It'll appear to do something similar, but there are some differences which again we'll get to on a little bit later. I'm going to drop the opacity, and the reason why I'm doing this is when I start drawing over this, I want to make sure I can see my line work, and as we continue we're going to lower the opacity, and eventually we aren't going to see the background, we're only going to see our line work on there. So I'm going to rename this image so I know what it is, and I'm going to lock that now. Now you can always unlock it to change the opacity, but it's going to help stop us from messing around with it. Back onto my draw layer now. I'm going to run through a couple of very quick drawing tools with this. Very first is the brush tool. So shortcut is B for brush, and if I go to the brush tool here, you'll notice there are a few, click and hold with your mouse, there are a few different types of brushes here. Shortcut is B, it'll get us to our first brush tool. If you hit Shift and B, it will cycle through these. So once you get to know the shortcuts, if there's multiple things, but to be honest with you, we're only really going to be playing around with this brush tool here. And I'm going to select black from my color picker, and again this is my foreground color. You can add a secondary color or a background color over here. Let's say white for example, or red. I'm not really going to use that, and you can switch these around by using this arrow or shortcut X. Now I'm going to select a brush, and I'm going to click up to this icon here, and I already have most of my folders open, so I'm going to close that so it looks a little bit more what you may see when you first open up your panel. It may look something like this. You can stretch it out as required, and our very first drop down folder is general brushes, and here they are here: soft round, hard round, soft round, pressure. Now if you're using a Wacom tablet, this is going to become quite important. Essentially the pressure on the tablet is going to simulate certain elements such as pressure for size, pressure for opacity and flow. Now these first two brushes do not have a pressure assigned to them for anything. It's a soft round brush. Let's select black. I've got my color picker here as well, and I'm going to increase my brush size. Now brush size can be changed over here. Now if you're onto your screen, you can also right click, and if you're on your Wacom pen, there should be a couple of buttons on there, and the lower button will do the similar sort of thing. So I can bring up that menu here. So soft round brush, I can adjust the size here, and as I move it off you can see that brush has got bigger. Now that's a bit of a long way around to sort of see your brush size. So the other option is using the square brackets on your keyboard. So next to the letter P on your keyboard is two keys. There is a square brackets, basically left square bracket, right square bracket. They'll quite often have the curly brackets as well. I'm going to hit E for erase and just erase the P key, because you should know where that is now on your keyboard. And basically what these brackets will do is the one on the left will make your brush smaller, and the one on the right will make your brush bigger. So excuse the messiness of this. So square brackets, really important as a shortcut. I'm just going to hit E for erase. Just a quick one with the eraser. Shortcut is E for the erase tool. You can choose different brushes just like you would for the actual brush to erase. Anyway, so let's get back to this. And first brush, soft round brush, very simple, does a soft round sort of airbrush kind of effect. Now we can change the opacity up here. Opacity is going to be the amount of flow going through it, and I'm going to drop the background off so we can for a second. And lighter, darker. You can change this by sliding this, by clicking on the opacity and sliding it left and right. You can do a drop down and slide it, or you can use your keypad to press a number. So if I press number 3, let's jump off that for a tick. If we push number 3, we're going to get 30%. If we push 7, 70%. 0 is going to take us back to 100. And if you want something precise like 44, 45, you can go 45, and we can get 45%, and that's going to be 45% pass. And we can gradually build that up as required. So back to this, the hard round brush, similar sort of brush. Again, let's ramp up the opacity. Just going to get more of a solid line as opposed to a soft line. Now if we wish to draw a straight line, very simple, shift key is our friend. We can press shift and start drawing a line left to right, right to left. If you press shift from your and then click from a previous point, it will draw a continuous line from that last point. So I can, for example, draw a straight line, keep my finger on shift, move to another point, and then click down, and that line will follow wherever I want. Now this is really important. If you zoom in and you are having trouble following a line, this can be a great way to follow along. So click and then shift, and even though it is kind of a jagged line, if you zoom in close enough and you use a nice sized brush, most people won't notice that jagged line effect. Now I'm going to delete all these. Quickly select with my marquee tool and hit delete. Could use the eraser, but now I'm going to unselect that by going Command D. That's another shortcut we'll get into later. So B for brush. Now the big one is with our brushes is the pen pressure. So as I mentioned, we can go pen pressure, pressure size, etc. There is a shortcut way of doing this without having to cycle through these. You can set these brushes up however you like them, but I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So I'm going to select hard round, and as we saw before, hard round is just going to do a simple solid shape. Now if we have a look up the top here, there's our manual opacity. We can actually set opacity for pen pressure. So it's this little button here, and always use pressure for opacity. I'm going to click on that, and now what I'm going to find is that the pressure is based on opacity on my brush. So as I brush, the harder I press, the darker the lines are going to be. Cool. So I'm going to get rid of those again, and back to my brush. I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to go right to the end, and this button here is pressure for size. So now what I'm finding is the harder I press, the thicker the line. If I do a very slight line, it's going to be very narrow. So again, based on pressure, but adjusting for that. If I click on opacity and pressure, I get something that's going to vary my width and also my opacity at the same time. So the darker, the harder I press, the darker and wider the brush. The lighter I press, the softer and lighter. So you can do a combination of that, and you can start getting an idea of how we can do some very interesting lines. Now what I'm going to suggest that you use for this is brush tool, hard round, and set opacity to 100%, and set pressure size like that, so we can get some nice interesting size lines based on the pressure, and it is good to get used to that. So I'm going to delete those again. Back to B for brush. Now there are a few other things I'm going to show you real quick, is this sort of thing. So I'm going to draw a sort of a spiral thing there. If we have a quick look at that, we can see it is, there's quite a few sort of little jaggedy bits. It's not terrible. Now the other option is that we have this smoothing option. So I can click on that and I can ramp up smoothing, and I'm going to draw something similar. So you can actually see this has a lot more calculated smooth curves. We haven't got any sort of indents like we do here. It all kind of just smooths out nicely, and that's kind of cool if we're trying to get something of that style. The deficit of this is we do get a bit of lag, especially if we've got a large brush. You can see it starts lagging behind, or if we get some very complex special effects brushes and things like that. It is going to take quite a while for it to catch up, and as you can see, it's really slowing down now as it calculates the complicated brushes and the smoothing effects, and you may crash Photoshop depending on the computer's capabilities. Alright, so I'm going to clear those out. So remember, shift key, keeping straight line, smoothing, good. I will typically not have that on. Another couple of things. So B for brush, I'm switching over to black. I'm using the shortcut keys for this, by the way. And this little option here, now this is our brush settings. There it is, there's a little file here. And what you can see now is the different settings of the brush. So there's a lot in here. I'm not going to get too far into them, but shape dynamics is currently ticked on. And if I click on there, you can see size jitter, which is adjusting the size. And you can see that is set to pen pressure, and that is because this icon is off. I turn that off, you can see size jitter turns off. If I turn opacity on, we can see transfer applies, and that is now set to pen pressure. So you can manually go into the brush settings and build brushes this way, but I do like having these shortcuts up here for that. Okay, so this is going to be a great one for drawing. Here's our image here, and use your square brackets to start adjusting your size. And again, I'm going to turn on pressure for size and use your zoom in. So zoom in, Command or Control plus, Command or Control minus. Now I've got some extra bits down the top and bottom of this image that I don't really need right now. So I'm going to show you how to cut this entire image or canvas down. So I'm going to zoom out, Control minus, and I'm going to go to the crop tool. Shortcut is C. It's over here on the toolbar. Looks like a couple of boomerangs, and as soon as you click on it, it will bring up this frame here, and you can actually shrink down your canvas as required. Now a few other things with this as well. It does have some pretty cool things like straighten. We're getting into that later. You can rotate as well and crop, and you can get a preview of what your image is going to look like. Don't like where it's going, hit the circle with a line through it. Now another thing that a lot of people don't realize with the crop tool is it's not just for cropping down. If you need to expand your canvas out, you can also expand it upwards and sideways, and you can apply it and you get a much larger canvas. So if you need to start extending an image out, that could be a very handy one to do. But for me at the moment, I'm just going to zoom in and just get close to that screen ratio that we want. Once you're done, apply it by hitting the tick or enter, and there we have it there. So it needs a little bit more cropping, but again, zoom in just to confirm. Spacebar will bring up the hand tool, and close enough for demo purposes. Great, there's my image. I've got my blank layer above. Don't be afraid to make new blank layers if it's not working for you, and brush tool, and we can manually start. So don't forget, zoom in to get your details. Change your brush size accordingly. So if we're doing something like fine detail, lower your brush size. Now we want to get some good lines here. We want closed shapes if possible. I'm going to show you another very cool trick, something you may wish to use. Pen tool, down the bottom here, shortcut is P. The standard pen tool can be set to path or shape. Shape will create a vector based shape which can be further edited, and it's all very exciting, but to be honest with you, really not what we need. I'm just going to delete that. What I am going to look at is the freeform pen tool. It's the next tool down, so make sure that you are on that. It does have an option for magnetic, which is going to be very handy as well. We're going to make sure it's set to path, not shape, and this is going to allow us to actually draw freehand with the pen tool. Now I've drawn it there and it's created a path. Now the path does not have a line attached to it. This blue line is a path, not a line, and this means that it can be further changed and manipulated. I'm going to delete all of that a couple of times. Now what I am going to show you is that a path can have a line applied to it, and the line can be decided by numerous things. So I'm going to go back to my brush tool, and I've just accidentally switched off this. Let's jump back to there. I'm going to jump back here and I'm going to select an appropriate brush. Now for this one I'm actually going to go fairly large just for demo purposes, and let's pick out a color that's going to stand out a little bit, maybe a nice big purple one. I've got the pressure set to size over here, and there it is there. So chosen my brush, chosen the size of my brush that I want applied and the color. I'm going to go to my pen tool again. Now I'm also going to turn on magnetic. Now magnetic is going to rely on the contrast between the image, so if it is struggling you may wish to ramp up the opacity of your actual image, up to you, and then you can start drawing, and it will hopefully, if it's a good contrast, it will start automatically dropping in lines. Now you can end a line at any time by hitting enter, which is pretty cool. And then what you can do is you could right click, and again I'm using the lower button on the Wacom pen, and over the line, and then you go to stroke path. Stroke path will typically start off with the pencil. We're not using the pencil at the moment, we're using the brush, so I'm going to click over to the brush. I'm going to make sure simulate pressure is turned on for this instance, and I'm going to hit OK. And what that does is it applies whatever brush style and color and size and pressure to that line. I'm then going to hit delete to delete the path that I've created with the pen. If I hit delete again, it will delete that layer, so I don't want to do that. I just want to get rid of the path. And then maybe what I could do is continue. Now if the path, the magnetic side of the path, is not quite going where you want it to go, you can sort of force its hand by clicking. So move it, click it where you want it to go, but after a while it might actually do a decent job. If it's a good contrast, it should tick along nicely. Hit enter. You can do multiples of this. You can continue on a previous line, or just start a new line. Just hit enter and then start drawing a new line if required. Now again, this is not for everyone. It's not for every situation, but it is a very handy one to know. So right click, stroke path, and there it is there. You may wish to experiment with different brush sizes, colors, pressures and stuff like that. So at the moment purple's not really conducive for what we're doing. The line width's too high, too wide as well. So I'm just going to get rid of those. So what we're going to do after this is I'm going to actually quickly going to fill this in. We're going to add some colors based on what we've got here and some effects. So ideally what we're trying to do is create an image that looks like we've hand drawn it.